the cover-up didn't start this year. It began long before the public ever knew the full extent of what was hidden. For decades, one of the most powerful men in America has worked tirelessly to bury a connection that, if fully exposed, could unravel everything. We're talking about Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, two names that, when spoken together, reveal a pattern of behavior so disturbing that even now, the truth is being suppressed. This isn't speculation. This isn't conspiracy theory crafted in the dark corners of the internet. This is documented evidence, witness testimony, and a letter, written by Epstein himself, that was deliberately concealed from the public eye. A letter that names Trump. A letter that describes crimes committed against children. A letter that was blocked from ever reaching its intended recipient. The first attempt to hide this truth happened during Trump's first term in office. And now, as newly released documents surface, only to be quickly buried again, we're seeing the same playbook in action. The question isn't whether there's something to hide anymore. The question is, how deep does this go? Before we dive into the explosive details of this newly published Epstein document, let's establish the foundation. Because understanding the context of Trump's relationship with Epstein is critical to grasping why this cover-up has been so relentless, and so dangerous.
At the height of Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse of children and sex trafficking, Donald Trump said in 2002, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy, he's a lot of fun to be with. It has even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." The younger side. How many 48-year-old men do you know who invite 14-year-old girls to their parties? Jeffrey Epstein did that, and so did the 48-year-old Donald Trump. The New York Times reports that Donald Trump held parties at his home in Florida where he invited 14-year-old girls. Tina Davis, who worked with Ford models in the mid-1990s, said in an interview that her Ford booker instructed her to get dressed up and attend a Mar-a-Lago party in late 1994. Just 14 and new to Miami, she was told to dress sexy, according to her mother, Sandra Coleman, who had accompanied her to Florida. 8 or 9 other models came along on the bus. All the girls were really young, Ms. Coleman recalled in an interview. Some of them could have been in training bras. When they arrived at Mar-a-Lago, Ms. Coleman said her daughter was promptly handed a glass of champagne. She took it away, but waiters kept offering more. Each time one of the middle-aged men at the party approached her daughter, Ms. Coleman would walk over and introduce herself as Ms. Davis's mother. During a trip to the bathroom, they ran into Mr. Trump's new wife, whom they had met earlier. Marla Maples clasped her hands. Ms. Coleman recalled, and looked her in the eye. "Whatever you do, do not let her around any of these men, and especially my husband," she told Ms. Coleman. "Protect her." 14 years old, invited to Donald Trump's home, handed champagne repeatedly. Unlike her former husband, Donald Trump, Marla Maples, Donald Trump's second wife, responded to New York Times inquiries about that story. The New York Times reports Ms. Maples denied making the comment, "I would always protect young women in any way I could," she said, "but I am sure I didn't specifically say that about my daughter's father." Donald Trump's second wife, Marla Maples, received a substantial financial settlement in her divorce from Donald Trump. The Times reports Mr. Epstein was a frequent guest at Mar-a-Lago parties. A woman who said Mr. Epstein trafficked her in the late 1990s and early 2000s recalled attending at least a half a dozen of the parties, beginning when she was 17. She told the New York Times that the invitations she received when she was 17 were, quote, "to be Donald Trump's guest at Mar-a-Lago." According to one invitation she shared with the Times, the parties were open bar and no one checked IDs. She said Mr. Trump was always all over them, she recalled.
Let that sink in for a moment. A 14-year-old girl handed champagne at Mar-a-Lago while middle-aged men circled. And Trump's own wife, Marla Maples, felt compelled to warn a mother to protect her daughter. Specifically from her husband, this wasn't a one-time incident. According to multiple witnesses and investigative reporting, this was a pattern. Young girls, some as young as 14, were brought to Trump's estate under the guise of modeling opportunities or exclusive parties. And at the center of it all was Jeffrey Epstein, moving freely through Mar-a-Lago as a frequent guest. Now, fast forward to 2025. Just days ago, a trove of documents, referred to as the Epstein Files, was briefly uploaded to the Department of Justice website before being swiftly taken down. Among those files was something that sent shockwaves through anyone paying attention, a letter allegedly written by Jeffrey Epstein himself, postmarked just days after his death in federal custody. The letter was addressed to Larry Nassar, the convicted sex offender and former USA gymnastics doctor. And in it, Epstein doesn't just hint at what he and Trump were involved in, he states it outright. Here's what the letter said, and I quote, "Dear Ellen, as you know by now, I have taken the short route home. Good luck. We shared one thing, our love and caring for young ladies in the hope they'd reach their full potential. Our president shares our love of young girls, noble girls. When a young beauty walked by, he loved to grab and snatch, whereas we ended up snatching grub in the mess halls of the system. Life is unfair. Yours, J. Epstein." Read that again. Our president shares our love of young girls. Epstein wasn't being subtle. He was naming Trump directly. He was drawing a direct line between his own crimes he was imprisoned for, and the man who was sitting in the Oval Office at the time. But here's the thing, this letter was never delivered. It was returned to sender. And despite being submitted for handwriting analysis, the public was never told whether investigators confirmed it was genuinely written by Epstein. The letter sat in the archives, buried, until now, and that's not all. In the same data dump, again, briefly visible before being scrubbed, there was an internal email from an assistant U.S. attorney. The email, dated from 2020, reads, "Donald Trump traveled on Epstein's private jet many more times than previously reported, including during the period we would expect to charge in a Maxwell case. Didn't want any of this to be a surprise down the road. Let's break that down. Federal prosecutors knew, back in 2020, during Trump's first term, that he had flown on Epstein's plane far more frequently than what had been publicly disclosed. And they knew it during the exact timeframe relevant to Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, the woman who enabled Epstein's trafficking operation. Yet, somehow, this information never made it into the public sphere. It was kept quiet. Deliberately, why? Why would prosecutors sit on evidence that the sitting president had far deeper ties to a sex trafficking ring than anyone knew? The answer is disturbingly clear, because Trump's administration had the power to ensure certain truths never surfaced. Now, as of December 2025, those truths are starting to leak. But they're leaking in fragments, redacted, mislabeled, and released in ways that seem almost designed to confuse rather than inform. On the surface, it looks like transparency. In reality, it's controlled chaos. Some are calling it incompetence. But when you look at the pattern, when you see how victim names are left exposed while perpetrator details are blacked out, when documents that should provide clarity instead raise more questions, it starts to look like something else entirely. It looks like sabotage. And let's be honest about Bill Clinton's role in all of this. His statement demanding transparency is the right move, but it's also long overdue. The fact that he maintained ties with Epstein, that he was photographed with him repeatedly, that he traveled with him, it's disgusting. And it should have disqualified him from public life years ago. Many Democrats, myself included, have been uncomfortable with the continued platforming of Bill Clinton within the party. During the last election, while we were talking about Epstein's crimes, Clinton was still speaking at the Democratic National Convention. He was still being sent out to campaign. That was a massive lapse in judgment. Clinton should not be the face of the Democratic Party. Period. His accomplishments as president can be acknowledged without giving him a platform today. And frankly, most Democrats agree with that. It's disappointing to see anyone still elevating him in 2025, especially given what we know about his Epstein connections. But here's the difference between Democrats and Republicans on this issue: we're willing to say that out loud. We're willing to hold our own accountable. We don't need to protect Bill Clinton. If he did something wrong, he should face consequences. Republicans, on the other hand, will defend Donald Trump no matter what. They'll redact documents. They'll break the law. They'll gaslight survivors. All to protect one man, and now that Clinton has called for full release, what's Trump's argument? How can Republicans claim Democrats are blocking transparency when the Democrat they mention most, the one they've been using as a political weapon, just demanded everything be made public? They can't. The cover-up is entirely on Trump. He has the power. He has the authority. He's choosing not to act. This is illegal obstruction, plain and simple. And it's happening every single day, every single hour, every single second. In recent developments, congressional investigators have revealed that the Trump administration has been actively interfering with efforts to comply with the Epstein Files Release Act. Multiple whistleblowers have come forward alleging that White House officials personally intervened to block certain documents from being processed for release, a direct violation of federal law. This isn't speculation. This is a coordinated cover-up at the highest levels of government. And one congressman has been leading the charge to expose it.
Reporting from Julie K. Brown on DOJ's botched release of the Epstein Files this past Friday. She says, quote, "The rollout did not go smoothly. Victims and the public were upset by the small amount of material, the heavy redactions, and the government's failure to place any documents in the proper context. The digital download included hundreds of photographs, none of them labeled, and did not include witness and victim statements made to the FBI. Quote, many of the redactions were of material that has previously been made public." Again, redactions of material that has previously been made public or that was supposed to be unsealed under the new law. Joining us now is Julie K. Brown, investigative reporter for the Miami Herald, the woman whose reporting we can credit for knowing anything that we know about this story in the first place. Julie K. Brown, it is really nice to see you again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Julie, what have you been hearing from some of the Epstein survivors since the release of these documents on Friday?
I think that it's starting really to turn into anger at this point, especially with a lot of these victims have found their own names that have been not redacted in some of this material that has come out. And they're quite frustrated because they see so many other redactions that are saying it almost appears as though the government made sure that they redacted the information that perhaps were clues or provided information about what happened in these cases or who was involved, but they didn't pay enough attention to making sure that they would protect the victims' identities.
There it is. Clear as day. This is not about protecting victims. This is about protecting Donald Trump. Congressman Jamie Raskin just laid out the facts with surgical precision. The statute governing the release of these documents is explicit. Redactions are only permitted for 4 specific reasons: protecting child abuse victims, shielding ongoing investigations, safeguarding national security, or preventing physical harm. That's it. Those are the only legal justifications. And according to the DOJ itself, there are no ongoing investigations. So what possible reason could there be for entire documents to be blacked out? What national security interest is served by hiding photographs and grand jury testimony? None. The only interest being served here is Donald Trump's personal interest in keeping his Epstein connections buried, and let's not forget, Trump opposed the Epstein Files Release Act from the beginning. He fought against it. He tried to kill it. Only when it became clear the bill would pass did he suddenly claim to support it. And even then, it was obvious he had no intention of actually complying. Now, his Justice Department is openly defying the law. They're obstructing a congressional mandate. They're lying about their reasons. And they're doing it all to protect the president. This is the same administration that claims to stand for law and order. The same president who ran on draining the swamp. The same people who lecture everyone else about accountability and transparency, and yet here they are, breaking the law in broad daylight to cover up Trump's ties to a convicted child sex trafficker. The hypocrisy is staggering. But it's also revealing. Because it shows exactly how much power Epstein's network still holds. It shows how deeply embedded this culture of abuse and impunity is among the wealthy and powerful. Jeffrey Epstein didn't operate alone. He had connections to business leaders, politicians, academics, celebrities, people from every sector of American society. And for decades, that network protected him. Even after his 2008 conviction, he continued trafficking young girls. Even after survivors came forward, he faced no real consequences. Why? Because people in power wanted it that way. Because prosecutors like Alex Acosta, who later became Trump's labor secretary, gave him a sweetheart deal that let him walk free. Because judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officials looked the other way, and now, the same pattern is repeating itself under Trump. The same culture of protection. The same disregard for survivors. The same prioritization of powerful men over vulnerable victims, but there's one critical difference this time: people are paying attention. Survivors are speaking out. Congress is demanding action. And the public is no longer willing to accept excuses. Jamie Raskin has been fighting for Epstein accountability since 2018. He held hearings on Alex Acosta's corrupt plea deal. He wrote letters demanding transparency. He pushed for investigations when others wanted to move on, and now, he's leading the charge to expose Trump's cover-up. Not because he's playing politics. Not because he's trying to score points. But because he knows that justice delayed is justice denied, and these survivors have waited long enough. The photographs that were released, Bill Clinton with Jeffrey Epstein, Clinton with Ghislaine Maxwell in a jacuzzi, they're disturbing. They raise serious questions. And those questions deserve answers, but here's what's important to understand: being photographed with Epstein doesn't automatically make someone a criminal. Epstein was a master manipulator. He cultivated relationships with powerful people. He positioned himself as a philanthropist, a financier, a connector. He ingratiated himself into elite circles precisely so he could use those connections as